Welcome to Module 2 of this module series, Grammar Fundamentals for a Pluralistic Society. My name is Kate Crowley in the program of Speech-Language Pathology at Teachers College, Columbia University, and I've created this series of modules with my co-author, Chad Grossman. This module will outline some morphosyntactic features of American English dialects relating to the use of nouns, determiners, and pronouns. You may remember from elementary school that nouns are words that represent a person, place, thing, or idea. There are many ways to categorize nouns. There are proper nouns, for instance, which refer to specific entities such as Paul and the month of April. There are also common nouns such as bread and teacher that refer to general groups or classes. We can also categorize nouns by whether they are count or non-count. Count nouns refer to countable objects such as book, cup, and boy. You can have multiple books, multiple cups, and multiple boys. Non-count nouns, on the other hand, refer to objects that cannot be counted or pluralized, such as mail, dirt, and happiness. You can't, for example, have multiple mails, multiple dirts, or multiple happinesses. We can also categorize nouns by whether they are concrete or abstract. Concrete nouns refer to tangible physical entities such as an eraser or the Eiffel Tower, while abstract nouns refer to non-physical, intangible objects such as love, bravery, trust. Now we can change the form of nouns by making them plural. In Standard American English, the plural of a regular noun is formed by adding an s or es. So for example, bat becomes bats and bench becomes benches. Irregular nouns, however, have unique plural forms. For example, the plural form of mouse is mice and the plural form of goose is geese. We can also change the form of a noun to indicate possession by adding the possessive s. So children becomes children's, as in the children's dog, or Billy becomes Billy's, as in Billy's ball. Now, do you see any of our inflectional morphemes here? Here they are. These are some of the inflectional morphemes that we discussed in Module 1, the plural s and possessive s. In African American English, the plural s inflectional morpheme is not obligatory with a quantifier. So for example, in the phrase, he ate 3 apples, the quantifier 3 indicates that there are multiple apples. Therefore, inclusion of the s inflectional morpheme would be redundant in indicating that there are many apples. It's therefore non-obligatory in African American English. So an utterance like, he ate 3 apples, is grammatically correct in African American English. The possessive s inflectional morpheme is non-obligatory when word order indicates possession. So, for example, in the utterance, it daddy car, the word order already indicates possession. It's daddy's car. The addition of an s to indicate that the car is daddy's would therefore be redundant. So, it daddy car is a perfectly grammatical expression of possession in African American English. In Spanish-influenced English, the plural s inflectional morpheme is non-obligatory. For example, you might hear an utterance like, the dog are running, which is grammatically correct in Spanish-influenced English. We might also see double marking of plural nouns in Spanish-influenced English. For example, the bigs houses, which comes from the double plural marking in Spanish, las casas grandes. In Spanish-influenced English, prepositional phrases might be used instead of possessive nouns to indicate possession, as in, the house of my sister. In Standard American English, the possessive s inflectional morpheme would be used to indicate that it's my sister's house. In Spanish, however, it would be la casa de mi hermana, or directly translated as the house of my sister, which is an utterance we hear from a speaker of Spanish-influenced English. In Chinese-influenced English, the plural s inflectional morpheme is not obligatory with a quantifier. So, he ate 3 apples would be grammatically correct. Irregular nouns in Standard American English might be regularized in Chinese-influenced English. Deer, for example, has an irregular plural form in Standard American English. In Chinese-influenced English, it might be regularized by adding the inflectional morpheme s to form 3 deers. Let's take a brief quiz to assess our understanding of what we've just discussed. Let's identify the processes that are occurring in these utterances. So what's happening in Mike house? Here we have the omission of the possessive s inflectional morpheme. In Standard American English, the possessive s inflectional morpheme would be used to indicate that it's Mike's house. What about here? What's happening with 2 sheeps? Here we have regularization of an irregular plural. Sheep has an irregular plural form in Standard American English, and it's been regularized with the addition of the plural s inflectional morpheme. What about 3 cup? Here the plural s inflectional morpheme has been deleted. And how about Big's dogs? Here we have double marking of the plural. In Standard American English, it would be singly marked as in the big dog. And finally, the car of my father. What's happening here? Here we have the use of a prepositional phrase to indicate possession instead of the use of the possessive s inflectional morpheme, which would be used in Standard American English. Uh-oh, we have a dialect alert. These processes do not necessarily indicate a disorder. Some of them are dialectal features and characteristics of language differences. Let's see if we remember which dialects these features might be seen in. Omission of the possessive s inflectional morpheme is a feature of African American English. What about regularization of irregular plurals? That's a feature of Chinese-influenced English. How about deletion of the plural s inflectional morpheme? That can be seen in African American English, Spanish-influenced English, and Chinese-influenced English. Next, we have double marking of plurals. That is a feature of Spanish-influenced English. And finally, the use of prepositional phrases to indicate possession. Where might we find this? This is also a feature of Spanish-influenced English. Now, if we're assessing a child that presents with some of these features, do we know that it's SLI? Or could it be a dialectal variation? We don't know unless we know the child's cultural and linguistic background. Remember, we can't differentiate a language disorder from a language difference without knowing the child's language acquisitional history. Let's move on from nouns to determiners. Determiners indicate the reference of a noun. For example, the word cats by itself refers to all cats. However, if someone uses the determiners these or his to say these cats or his cats, we know which specific group of cats they're referring to. Some of the most recognizable determiners are the articles such as a, the, and an. The is referred to as a definite article because it implies a specific reference, such as the car, as in the car that my neighbor owns. Indefinite articles like a and an, on the other hand, are less specific. If we say, there is a car parked illegally across the street, a car could refer to any car, such as my car, their car, or your car. The phonetic context determines whether a or an is used. A comes from a word that begins with a consonant sound like a car, and an comes before a word that begins with a vowel, such as an apple. We have demonstrative determiners, which are this, that, these, and those. This and these refers to objects that are closer to the speaker, like this bowl is flat, while that and those refer to objects that are further away, like that cloud is white. This and that are singular forms, while these and those are plural forms. We also have possessive determiners, which attribute a noun with possession, such as my, yours, his, hers, its, our, and their. Some examples of possessive determiners would be that is my pen, or his cat is sick. Finally, we have quantifiers, which refer to the number of something. They include some, many, much, a lot of, and a little of, to name just a few. In African American English, they can be used as a possessive determiner to mark the third person plural possessive. In Standard American English, one would say their room, but in African American English, it's grammatically correct to say they room. We might also see use of what is called the demonstrative them, where them is used as a demonstrative determiner, as in, I want them shoes. Also evident is use of the indefinite a, regardless of phonetic context. So for example, a is used in the utterance, I want an apple. This is a grammatically correct form in African American English. Omission of articles is a feature of Spanish-influenced English. For example, I went to restaurant. We might also see use of the definite article instead of the possessive determiner when referring to body parts. For example, I broke the arm comes from the Spanish, me rompí el brazo. Omission of articles is also a morphosyntactic feature of Chinese-influenced English. So you might hear an utterance like, I go to dentist. You might also see over-inclusion of articles like, I go to the work. Chinese-influenced English also exhibits different use of demonstrative determiners. For example, an L of Chinese origin might use a plural determiner before a singular noun and say something like, give me those bike. In Chinese-influenced English, we could also see the use of the objective pronoun him instead of the possessive determiner his, as in that him house. All right, it's quiz time. Let's see if we can correctly identify the process that's occurring. I want those apple. Here we have different use of the demonstrative pronoun. What's happening is they are using a plural demonstrative determiner before a singular noun. How about go to dentist? Here we have omission of an article. In Standard American English, it would be go to the dentist or a dentist. Let's try this one. Get out of their room. Here we have the possessive use of they. What about in give me them papers? Here we have demonstrative use of them. And finally, what about this one? What's happening in I hurt the elbow? Here we have use of an article instead of a possessive determiner. And what do you know? We have another dialect alert. Different use of demonstrative determiners can occur in Chinese-influenced English. An omission of articles is a grammatically correct feature of Spanish-influenced English and Chinese-influenced English. What about possessive use of they? That's a feature of African-American English. And demonstrative use of them? That's another feature of African-American English. And finally, what about use of the article instead of a possessive marker when referring to a body part? That's a feature of Spanish-influenced English. So again, we have to know the language acquisitional history of the student whose language we are assessing. Otherwise, we might inappropriately identify a student as having a language disorder when really they're simply demonstrating good language learning from a speech community with a language difference. Let's now move on to pronouns. Pronouns can take the place of a noun. For example, in the sentence, Tina got sick, we can replace Tina with she. In the example, I bought the old poetry book that Tom wanted and gave it to him. We have a few pronouns, I, it, and him. Now, pronouns have to clearly refer to one noun that comes before it. This is called pronoun reference. The noun that a pronoun refers to is called that pronoun's referent or antecedent. So in this example, the antecedent for it is the old poetry book, and the antecedent for him is Tom. Problems occur when a referent is unclear. For example, in this sentence, the car hit the tree and it was not damaged. It's unclear whether it is referring to the car or the tree. This can be called unclear pronoun reference. Referential cohesion refers to the cohesion ties between pronouns and their reference. So in the context of a narrative, we're looking at whether grammatical elements such as pronouns are being used to introduce, distinguish, and maintain reference to characters or objects in a story. There are many varieties of pronouns. Personal pronouns represent persons or entities. There are subjective pronouns, which are used when the pronoun serves as the subject of a sentence. They are I, you, he, she, it, we, you, and they. A subjective pronoun performs the action of a verb. So, for example, in a sentence, he jumped over the fence, he is performing the action of jumping. There are also objective pronouns, which are used when the pronoun serves as the object of a sentence. They are me, you, him, her, it, us, you, and them. An objective pronoun receives the action of the verb. In the sentence, Annie ate it, it is receiving the action of the verb. Annie ate what? Annie ate it. Possessive pronouns are used to signify ownership or possession, like in the book is mine. They include mine, yours, his, hers, ours, yours, and theirs. There are also reflexive pronouns, which are used when a person or entity performs an action on himself, herself, or itself, such as John wrote himself a note. It's important to notice that the reflexive pronouns are formed by adding the suffix self or selves to the possessive determiners, such as my, your, and our, myself, yourself, and ourself, except for the third person singular himself and plural themselves, which are formed by adding the suffix self and selves to the objective pronoun him and them. Remember our demonstrative determiners? Well, a demonstrative pronoun replaces specific people or things and indicates whether it's close by or further away. Remember, this and these indicates something close by, and that and those indicates something further away. So this tastes delicious. There are also indefinite pronouns, which don't refer to any specific person, thing, or amount. Thus, they are vague and indefinite. Some typical indefinite pronouns are anything, anybody, something, somebody, everything, nothing, nobody, and so on. An example of their uses is anybody coming? We also have interrogative pronouns, which are our classic WH questions: who, what, where, when, and why. For example, who ran the fastest? Finally, there are relative pronouns, which refer to a noun as the other pronouns do, but also mark a relative clause. In the sentence, do you know the boy who was talking to Tom? Who introduced the relative clause, who was talking to Tom. We'll learn more about relative clauses in Module 5. A morphosyntactic feature of African American English is pronominal apposition, which is when a pronoun immediately follows the noun it refers to. For example, in the sentence, my brother, he said, or my brother, he said. There is also omission of relative pronouns, such as in, he the one called your mom. In Standard American English, the relative pronoun would be used, so it would be, he's the one who called your mom. Again, relative pronoun omission is a feature in African American English and is therefore grammatically correct in that dialect. In African American English, reflexive pronouns are regularized. Remember our reflexive pronouns in Standard American English? The first and second person singular and plural forms are made by combining possessive determiners: my, your, and our, myself, yourself, ourself, with the suffix self or selves, except for the third person singular and plural forms. In Standard American English, the objective pronouns him and them are used to form the third person singular and plural reflexive pronouns. In African American English, these reflexive pronouns are regularized by using the third person singular and plural possessive determiners. So himself becomes his self, and themselves become their selves. We also see use of the suffix self in both singular and plural forms. So you might see an utterance like, he hit himself. A morphosyntactic feature of Spanish-influenced English is omission of subjective pronouns when they're mentioned in the previous sentence. For example, John is happy, won the lottery, which comes from Spanish, John es feliz, ganó la lotería. In Spanish, subjective pronouns are not necessary when mentioned in the previous sentence, and this feature is transferred into Spanish-influenced English, can be. In Spanish-influenced English, there's no distinction between objective and subjective pronouns. So, for example, you might see an utterance like, her walked home. This comes from the Spanish, ella caminó a casa. In Chinese-influenced English, there is also no distinction between objective and subjective pronouns. So you might find a sentence like, him go to store. There is also no distinction between male and female gender pronouns in Chinese-influenced English, as in, she gave her the book when the pronouns are referring to men. I want to remind you that these features of language transfer between both Spanish and Chinese can also be seen in monolingual English students growing up in Latino or Chinese communities. Let's take a quiz to assess our understanding. What process is occurring in him hit the ball? In this utterance, the objective pronoun him is being used instead of the subjective pronoun his. How about, my sister, she fell? Here we have pronominal apposition, where the pronoun she immediately follows the noun sister. And finally, he hit himself. Here we have a regularization of the reflexive pronoun. And another dialect alert. Are you sensing a pattern here? Let's identify some dialects that demonstrate these grammatical features. No distinction between subjective and objective pronouns is a feature that can be observed in Chinese-influenced English and Spanish-influenced English. Pronominal apposition is a feature that can be found in African-American English, and regularized reflexive pronouns can be found in African-American English. Good work. This concludes Module 2 of Grammar Fundamentals for a Pluralistic Society.